Welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm Chris Ferris and I'm here with Chris Ryan. And today we're going to talk about the CPP and do our best to demystify the black box that is the CPP retirement benefit. There's a lot to talk about with the CPP, so we're going to talk primarily about some of the basics in this episode and expand on it in a future episode. So to get us started, Chris, what is the CPP?
Yeah, so the Canada Pension Plan is a defined benefit plan that was rolled out by the government, recognizing that defined benefit pensions were becoming less common for the average individual. So hoping to fill that gap for the average Canadian, providing them with a stable indexed pension throughout retirement for the remainder of their lives. Now, there's some bad reps or people sometimes will challenge the Canada Pension Plan's ability to have staying power over time and worry that it's going to run out of money one day. There's good news on that front. The most recent audit performed in 2022 confirmed that CPP is strong and well-funded, confirming there's about 75 years of, of funding available there. So no concern there. We can certainly plan around it and rely upon it as an important pillar to our retirement picture.
Mm-hmm. And the benefit is calculated. Essentially, it's intended to be 25% of this number that they have that's called the year's maximum pensionable earnings. So YMPE for short. And currently that number is $68,500 this year in 2024. That number goes up every year, and it goes up not by inflation, but by essentially the average earnings. So the target maximum benefit for the CPP up until recently was 25% of that number. Recently in about 2019, they increased the benefit to cover in the long run 33% of the YMPE. So essentially, it's a gradual implementation. So over time, the maximum benefit will increase. The more working years you have left, the more that increased maximum benefit will come into play. It is something to consider going forward. We are going to be able to plan to see a larger portion of your earnings covered by CPP up to that YMPE number. So it's essentially like a pension plan, a defined benefit pension plan that ignores earnings above that level.
Yeah, and these enhancements are certainly positive. It will take a little bit of time for them to be fully implemented, and for the average person who's middle of their career, they might see a bit of a benefit, or for the younger generation, that'll definitely play an enhanced role, which will be nice.
Because again, it is based on your contributions.
Yeah.
So the more you've contributed in the more years of your life and the more working years you have, the larger your benefit will be. There are, in addition to those contributory features, there's also provisions that allow you to drop out a portion of your years where you maybe earned less for one or another reason.
Yeah, so the Canada Pension Plan, will look at your careers, basically starting at age 18 up until when you request for the benefits to begin, and they'll consider that to be your career. And within that context, they recognize that, hey, not everybody is firing on all cylinders as far as their earnings capacity right off the bat at age 18. So they do allow for you to basically remove some worse years from the calculation. And so we'll throw up a chart here, and we can see that we have sort of a standard career highlighted for us. And so we can see that we have an individual that had a little bit of slow time getting started, which wouldn't be totally unheard of.
And we go to school and spend the first 4 years of our adult lives training.
Yeah. And then you can see that things start to ramp up. And then a few years later is a bit of a drop in the earnings, followed by, they resume a strong earnings. They're exceeding the maximum. So we don't really know what they earn in those maximum years. It could have been significantly more. It could have been a few dollars more than that maximum. All that matters as far as Canada Pension Plan is concerned is that they did hit that max, and they ignore everything beyond that. So the way that this dropout provision will work is it'll ignore 17% of their worst years. And so if we assume in our example here that we have somebody who's going to work right up pretty much until age 65 and then request their Canada Pension Plan to start at that point, on the screen here that we have a case where somebody has a pretty standard working career, I would say. So we had a few years at the beginning where, they weren't necessarily earning their full potential. Maybe they're going to school. There's also a few years below the maximum in the middle there, as well as 1 year towards the end. So maybe, that final year, they didn't work the entirety of the year. And so we can see through our average here that they're not quite hitting the maximum. They're hitting about 85%. And that's simply, an average of all the years. So we're going to take a look at, what is the average of all those years? And then we can see through the dropout provision how that's going to help us improve things. So next, what we do is we drop out 17% of those worst years, which equates to about 8 years that we can essentially ignore from our average. And by ignoring those, we can now see that we've removed most of those bad years. There's still a couple that stay in there, but the average earnings has increased substantially. And now we've gone from 85% of the maximum pension to 99%. So a pretty drastic improvement.
So effectively, those years are still counted as working years, as contributing years. But by removing the lowest numbers from the calculation of average earnings, you've increased that calculation of the average earnings.
Yeah, and the other thing that'd be good to note is that this is all done automatically behind the scenes by Canada Pension Plan. It is not something that we need to do a special request to have happen for us, or that we need to get involved in the math on.
And it's not just the lowest earning years that get factored into that calculation. If you have low income years specifically due to having a disability and being unable to work for a number of years, those years are also dropped out from the calculation of your average earnings, which again increases your average earnings and therefore your ultimate CPP benefit.
Yeah, and another dropout provision that I think is very important for people to be aware of, and when we speak to clients, they're not necessarily aware that this is something that they need to be paying attention to, is the child rearing provision. And so the child rearing provision is the CPP recognizing that by virtue of having kids, oftentimes that can impact the primary caregiver's earnings for a period of time when the kids are young and at home, or maybe we're off on mat leave. And so Canada Pension Plan will allow you to essentially backfill those years with the average of the years prior to the child's birth. And so we can go and replace, for example, a year when we're on maternity leave where we really didn't have very many earnings with the average of our, kind of what we were making before that. And so that's really powerful, but it is something that we need to request as part of the paperwork that we fill out when we go and we apply for Canada Pension Plan. And you do need to provide some verification of the child's birth, and so the birth certificate. And essentially, you're going to be able to do that for up to 7 years following the child being born. And so, even if that reduction in earnings goes on for some time, there is a nice opportunity there to enhance our CPP earnings.
What happens, Chris, if you have more than one child?
What they will do is they will allow you to essentially extend the period up till the 7 years beyond that second child's birth. So we don't get a duplication, we don't get an addition. Essentially, the coverage period will overlap. And so if we look at the example on the screen, we can see that we've gone from a 7-year period following the first child's birth to roughly a 9-year period, because in this example we've had children that are born roughly 2 years apart.
Right. So all this is pretty complex. The good news is you don't have to record all of this yourself. The CPP has done it for you. You can actually request a statement of your CPP contribution history online. So if you have a Service Canada online account, you can request it. It's called a Statement of Contributions to the Canada Pension Plan. And that's available pretty much at any time if you've been contributing to the CPP. Obviously, the closer you are to retirement, the more up-to-date the numbers will be in terms of being able to calculate what your CPP, your personal CPP benefit will be when you decide to take it. But that is available online, and it's pretty easy to get into if you have a Service Canada online account.
Yeah, it's a great tool that they're pushing online, making it more available. So next, we're going to cover the contribution structure to the pension plan. What are we paying into this plan to achieve these benefits? And there have been some changes on that front as well, where we've moved from a regime that was trying to replace 25% of our pensionable income up to that 33% replacement rate. Now, in order to pay for that enhancement, what they've done is they've rolled out some increased contributions. So the first rollout involved a gradual or phased in increase to the contribution rate that we pay in. So for us as employees, that'll represent a 1% increase in totality. So that was completely implemented as of 2023. As a self-employed individual, that would represent a 2% increase because self-employed individuals will be paying double. So we're paying in more on our basic yearly maximum pensionable earnings, or YMPE. And we have a phase 2, which is being termed CPP 2, that involves a second portion of income that we're going to begin to contribute on, and that's entirely new. And so this is an entirely new income threshold. That again, there's a bit of a phased rollout here. Right now, that limit is about between $68,500 to $73,000 we'll be contributing on, and that's going to go up again next year by a pretty substantial amount. So the new cap on that second income bracket is going to be about $79,000. So the new bracket of income, we won't be contributing at the same rate. So we won't be contributing at that 5.95%. We'll be contributing at 4%. So it's not quite as painful, but it is, a pretty substantial increase overall in terms of the dollars that we're paying into the program. Of course, in the long run, for that, we are going to get a return on our investment through those enhanced.
Yeah, the higher contributions are what drive the benefits.
Yeah,
and you do get a little bit of a tax break for having made the contributions. The contributions on the original amount are entitle you to a tax credit, and the contributions on the new enhanced amount entitle you to a tax deduction, which is a little bit better and saves you a little more on your taxes.
Yeah.
So, you're eligible to start receiving your benefit as early as age 60. The standard age is 65, and you can also defer it till age 70. We'll have a little chart here to explain this a little more. 65 is the default year to start receiving it. If you take your CPP benefit earlier, there is a penalty of 0.6% per month that reduces the benefit to which you are entitled. If you defer it until age 70, there's a bit of an incentive, a bonus, which is 0.7% per month, which increases your CPP benefit if you wait. So clearly, it's a little bit lopsided. They are incentivizing people to take it later because that helps the funding of the plan. So the default maximum benefit, if you take it at age 65, is a little over $1,300 per month. Again, it does depend on your contribution history. The more consistent and the higher your contribution history is, as we explained previously, the higher your benefit will be, the closer it will be to that maximum.
Yeah, but Chris, did you know that the average Canadian was receiving CPP at this time, as of last year, was only about $758 per month. So about half.
That's actually a lot lower than I would have thought.
Yeah.
And, so it is contribution history that impacts that, but also the timing that you receive your benefit. So again, because there is a benefit for delaying and a penalty for starting early, when is the perfect time to take your CPP, Chris?
Oh, wouldn't that be a great question to answer? Have a nice formula or rule of thumb that we could use for that one. We'll get into that. We'll unpack that one in a little more detail in the part 2. I think we'll go through some case studies and kind of get to the bottom of what drives that decision.
It is absolutely a frequently asked question.
Yeah.
And it is pretty important because for a lot of people, if you don't have a defined benefit pension plan, the CPP is your defined benefit pension plan. It's not a big number relative to, what you're probably earning before. But it provides a nice, steady, inflation indexed benefit for you. So speaking of that, it is indexed to inflation.
Yeah, and so it will go up in line with CPI over time. And so you do have inflation protection, which is absolutely massive over a long period of time. And we're talking retirement timeframes of 25, 30 years. Even if that inflation normalizes back down to somewhere in, the 2% neighborhood, that works out to thousands and thousands of dollars.
Yeah, exactly. Unfortunately, it is a taxable benefit.
The taxmen, they do like to get their pound of flesh, unfortunately. So yes, it will be included as part of income in retirement. So add it right onto your tax return as any other income or pension income at that point. Unfortunately, no real preferential tax treatment for Canada Pension Plan.
But you can request to have tax withheld at source, just like from your paycheck when you pay the taxman over the course of the year. You can do the same thing with CPP. So
yeah, and that's actually a bit of a pain point for a lot of clients. Oftentimes we find that as they transition from being an employee to a retiree, they've gone from a setup where they have their employer who knows their entire income profile for the most part and can take off tax very accurately, to being a recipient of multiple sources of income, Canada Pension Plan, old age security, withdrawals from their investment portfolio. And that can cause a bit of a headache when they go to file their taxes, because these independent sources of income don't talk to each other. And so they have no way of coordinating the level of taxes taken off at source, such that we're kind of in the right ballpark when we go to file in April. So we'd recommend to clients is that as they're making that transition, to do a bit of an income tax forecast and try to figure out what their average tax rate would be in sort of that standard tax year, and use that as a bit of a starting point to have their multiple sources of income take tax off at source.
Because every source of income, if every source of income thinks that you're only earning $20,000 a year, they're going to withhold tax as if you're earning $20,000 a year. But when you add 3 sources of income for that amount, suddenly you're in a much higher tax bracket. So it's a very common problem.
Yeah, and as a retiree, coming up to April and having a big tax bill, it can be pretty stressful.
Yeah, especially if you're on fixed incomes. So how do you get your CPP benefit?
Yeah, so the Canada Pension Plan it will not pay you automatically, right? You do need to go through a bit of a process to get that kick-started. So in order to start CPP, we need to apply. Right. There's a nice long form that we need to complete, which will include questions surrounding that child rearing provision that we were discussing earlier. So getting those extra years removed for lower income years following the birth of our children. That application can be completed as early as 12 months before 60th birthday if we're planning on taking the CPP early. So you'll receive some mail from Service Canada. They're pretty good about sending you that stuff in advance. You'll get it ahead of a few of your main milestone birthdays. So you'll get some paperwork ahead of your 60th birthday, as well as 65th birthday.
And I think the absolute earliest you can apply is the month after your 59th birthday for a start date that is your 60th birthday.
Yeah, if you really want to be an early bird and make sure everything's lined up for that 60th birthday, you can definitely get it put in nice and early. We recommend that if you are going to start up your CPP benefits, that you think about doing that roughly 3-4 months ahead of time from when you want them to kick in. The process is much quicker if you do it online these days.
Right.
So turnaround time with that can be a matter of weeks, as opposed if you do things over mail. Snail mail is pretty slow. Now we're talking months. So I certainly recommend going the electronic route if you're comfortable there.
And pretty much anyone who's worked in Canada and made even a single valid CPP contribution,
they're going to get something. Yeah.
Yeah. So it doesn't hurt to apply. It's you're entitled to it. So.
Absolutely.
I think that covers all the basics of the CPP.
I think we went through the mechanics in some detail without putting people to sleep. We hope. So, what we'll do in the next episode is we'll come back and we'll unpack some of these features in a little more detail, particularly the start dates and how that all kind of filters into an actual financial picture and retirement funding picture. So stay tuned for that episode. We'll definitely get into some more advanced planning considerations.
Great. Thanks for listening, and we hope to see you again soon.